We're heading into this bank holiday weekend again, and it's expected to be sunny in a few parts of the country. I don't think it's going to be that sunny, but
it's kind of changed, has it?
Anyway,
but
people are off.
People are off, and if it's not pouring with rain, they want to get out.
Any excuse at all, people want to get out and about. And as you've seen from the past few days, when it was really sunny, a lot of people heading to the beach.
I mean, look at it. You would never know that that is
Southend.
Southend. You know, you think that that was the height of the summer last year.
Or that there was no pandemic going on.
No pandemic. People there, no masks. Everybody's crushed onto the beach. At Wandsworth Common last night in London, people were gathering, having
like
little barbecues, like a festival. Apparently there was a pub on the corner that, you couldn't go into the pub, but they were selling kind of pitchers of beer and things and jugs of beer. So everyone was out having a lovely time.
Right,
but
so is all that right or is all that wrong? Should you be doing that or avoiding busy outdoor places, parks, beaches, all that sort of thing?
Well, we're joined now by Virologist Professor Jonathan Ball. Good morning to you, Professor Ball. You've seen the pictures there that we're all looking at. What did you make of those packed beaches?
OK, well, obviously, if we've got beaches as packed as the pictures showed there, you've got an increased risk of the virus jumping from an infected person to an uninfected person. And that's why the advice at the moment is to try and keep a safe distance from other people when you're out and about. And a safe distance, if possible, is considered to be around 2 metres.
So why do those people not seem to be listening? What's going wrong with the message or how lockdown is being eased, Professor, that we're seeing scenes like this?
Well, I think that's the problem is that there's a significant difference between a lockdown being eased and a lockdown finishing. And I think some people out in the community have maybe lost sight of the fact that there is a significant difference. And I think, you know, one thing we have to accept is being outside and being outdoors does decrease the chances of you picking up the virus, because we know that there's a huge dilution effect. So when somebody breathes out or coughs or you know, produces virus droplets, because even on a still day, there's a lot of air movement still, and there's a huge volume of air above your head when you're outside, that virus very quickly dissipates, and you do need to have a certain number of virus particles to get an infection, to become infected. Yeah. And so certainly being outdoors is much better than being indoors, but you still have to be sensible. And I think one of the biggest problems is when you're thinking about a beach or the park, when you showed people sitting outside, if you're stationary and you're sitting next to somebody who's infected, then you do increase your risk of picking up the virus, even if you're outside, because you're constantly being in their environment.
Here are pictures that have just come in from Southend Beach this morning. And obviously, you know, very early, so nothing much happening. But there are going to be marshals there in high visibility jackets just to enforce social distancing, to make people really aware that they actually have to stay that 2 metres apart. But as you can see there, the weather just maybe not as good as it has been earlier in the week.
What would you say, Professor, to people who are waking up this morning thinking, you know what, if it is nice this weekend, what's the harm of us? You know, we're all in the same household, we get into the car, we take the kids down to the beach, as long as we try and stay away from people. What would your advice to them be today?
Well, I think if people are following the advice, then there's no problem. And as I say, being outside is a good thing. It's good for mental health, let alone general well-being. But I think that the key point is whether or not, if you turn up to somewhere with a car full of kids and that beach happens to be packed and you're not allowed on it, then you can deal with the consequences on the journey home when they're, you know, crying their eyes out. So I think as long as people are sensible, there's no problem. And I think also remember where the risks are. So we think a lot about what we call touch surfaces. So those are things that lots of people can potentially touch. So things like handrails, door handles, and so if you're out and about and you need to use a toilet, for example, if there's a toilet open, be aware that any of those surfaces potentially could be contaminated. And so lots of places I know, parks that I have opened, have got precautions, measures in place that encourage people to wash their hands before they go into these places, and then to make sure that they wash their hands leaving. So remember surfaces and go out and enjoy yourself.
Yeah. What about swimming? You know, we saw a lot of people there on the beach. Some people were in the water. Is there any extra risk being in water? Can you catch the virus in water? Paddling pools, swimming pools?
That's a great question, because I think, intuitively you'd think, oh, that's quite risky because you're essentially bathing in other people's germs. But we know that viruses generally don't like seawater, for a start. And in fact, they don't really like water that much anyway. And if it's a swimming pool or a paddling pool, if any of those are open, we know that the chlorine in the water is an incredibly good antiviral, so a effective means of killing that virus. So
okay,
there's not an increased risk of
detecting
swimming.
that virus is something else. What I want you to do, Professor, just hang on there, because I want to bring in Dr Nick Morant now. He's a senior scientist at a company called OptiGene Limited, and you're very, very topical at the moment, Doctor, because you got the Health Secretary yesterday announcing that the UK government working with your company, and you have developed a new test for COVID-19, which can give results, we hear, within half an hour, maybe just 20 minutes.
Morning. Yes, that's correct. The test uses a different method. It's called LAMP. It's similar to the current qPCR testing that's used all over the UK, but importantly, it uses a different chemistry, and this allows the reaction to run at a single temperature. It still detects the presence or absence of the virus within the sample, but the portability issue is really sort of key, and it allows samples to be run at the point of care.
Right, so this is amazing. The government are really saying this is a game changer, because this is, with results so instantaneous almost, you could see this being used at airports and whatever. How close are you on being able to roll this out?
We've been running validation studies for the last month or so. It's a relatively new test, especially for the NHS, and therefore additional validation has been required. But the tests are looking extremely promising, thanks to the Hampshire Hospital Trust, who have are one of the front runners in using the test and adopting it within the hospital. It's being used within the A&E department to triage people at the current time. So we know the test works. It's just a case of rolling it out and seeing how the next pilot study goes across Hampshire.
OK, but has it got the thumbs up from, Public Health England, for instance?
We're still waiting for final sign-off the validation, but the individual hospital trusts who have used the test are extremely confident with the results they're seeing. It's directly comparable against the existing qPCR in the way that they're testing. But the advantage of the test is also to run off direct swabs, and that's the interesting thing for the pilot study in Hampshire, where they can take crude samples and test at the point of care, which can't currently be done with the existing qPCR technology.
Professor Jonathan Ball, all sounds good. I mean, the worry is, does the government overpromise on these things? That's really just what I was trying to get at there.
Yeah, no, I think we've learnt of these things in the past. For example, the millions of antibody tests that unfortunately lacked the specificity and sensitivity. So I think that's the key question here, is how does it compare to the current gold standard PCR test? We know from previous studies on other viruses, for example, Ebola virus, that the so-called LAMP assay is slightly less sensitive than a gold standard PCR. So it'll be incredibly important to understand how those validation tests have been carried out, and to ensure that there have been sufficient numbers of tests where there's very, very low levels of virus, because you don't want to increase your chances of giving a false negative. But what I would say as well is that we have experienced problems with supply chain, with the PCR reagents and also the extraction reagents. And so this particular test, if it is as good as a PCR test, then could relieve some of those problems.
OK, well, let's hear Dr Morant's response to that, because I seem to be picking up from Professor Ball. Maybe there's a question mark over the accuracy of something like this?
In terms of a comparison against the existing qPCR test on running the same samples, over 1,000 samples have been run at Basingstoke Hospital. They're extremely comparable in both sensitivity and specificity. The separate test is the swab test, which any other method cannot run, and that is from direct saliva or direct from swab. And the results from that are extremely promising.
And does this mean that anybody, so you're saying that it's very mobile, this testing, so you could take this test to a GP surgery, a care home, and people could be tested on site and get that within 20 minutes?
Exactly. I've got an instrument here. This is a portable machine that's on. It's touchscreen, weatherproof. These can be taken around within portable containers and run in simple labs. It's still a laboratory-based test, but it requires a simple laboratory and relatively simple procedures to operate. So it's straightforward.
So straightforward, but a game changer, Dr. Morant, it sounds like. Is that what you would say?
Potentially, it's a proven technology. The reagents and the instruments have been run in South America for Zika testing, in Guinea for Ebola testing with our partners. So it's a proven technology. It's just the first time we've actually been able to implement it into the NHS system. So we're extremely excited.
Well, good luck with it. Gentlemen, thank you both very much indeed. Dr. Nick Morant and Professor Jonathan Ball there. Appreciate it.
Interesting.
Thank you.
Very interesting.